In a previous video, we looked at data governance, policies for our organization about how we collect, store, and destroy the data that we collect. Now let's look at the types of data that we might choose to collect. So we have primary data and we have secondary data. Primary data is new data that we gather to solve a problem. So if we're doing a focus group, we might be doing some exploration. How do potential customers feel about the design of our product? Or we might be doing a focus group with stakeholders. What would you like to see in a new program we're building at Red Deer Polytechnic? Or with our employees, what would you like to see in terms of the strategies and the goals for our organization? So focus groups collect data, and they're usually for exploratory research where we don't know the information, and so we're exploring possibilities. Other primary data includes surveys. Perhaps we're trying to get opinions from customers, from employees, from people participating in some kind of project. Maybe we provide a service to the community and we want some feedback as to how well that's going. There's also what's called observational research. Observational research is used for routine. That's the word my face is hiding. Routine public behavior. So observational research is where people do things all the time and they often do things without thinking about them. So it's difficult then to get at why they're doing something or what they did in a focus group or a survey because people don't think about it, they just act. So observational research is where we watch them do a particular activity to see what they're doing. So this might be in terms of observing traffic patterns. Where do cars go? How many pass by a certain location? This might be observing behaviors of birds, of other types of animals. Where do they go? How long do they stay? Which food do they prefer? This could be observing people as they make a purchase. What do they look at? How much time do they spend comparing different items? So there's lots of different types of observational research we can do. The key here is that it is routine behavior. So when you try to ask somebody to recall, you went to go buy a product, what did you think about? How did you decide? They just will say, well, I just did it. I always buy that product. And so it helps get some more information by observing the behaviors of individuals. Now, this is primary data. We also have secondary data where data is gathered previously for another purpose. So when it comes to that secondary data, it can be that we collected it into a database. It could be government collected data. It could be data that we're paying another entity to provide for us, or it could be an aggregate of lots of other research. So let's dive into first the primary data, and then we'll get into the secondary data. So just briefly, in case you want to do focus groups to collect data and haven't had some training in focus groups yet, maybe you haven't taken a marketing research course or a research design module that focused on focus groups. So we're just going to very briefly go through a focus group. So a focus group, we often think about focus groups as getting a bunch of customers to stand around and test out a product and provide feedback. So it's a comfortable setting. You sit in a circle. And the key with a focus group is that you only have 8 to 12 participants. If you have less than 8 participants, it's kind of hard to get people to talk. And one of the key things with focus groups is because you're exploring and you don't already have the answers, you need your participants to feed off of each other. So you need a comment by one to lead to a comment by someone else. If you have too few participants, you don't get this build where they feed off of each other. If you have too many participants, then people tend to have side conversations and it's hard to rein in the group and keep them focused on your topic. So 8 to 12 participants is the key. When it comes to designing a focus group, you're going to need a moderator. Somebody has good listening skills, someone who's good at small talk. Because when you're designing a focus group, you need to first make people comfortable. And then you need to encourage them to feed off of each other's conversations, to respond. And so you need to be able to listen and adapt based on what they are saying. You're going to need some kind of note taker or a recording method to capture the information. And you're going to need a discussion guide. It's good to write out the discussion guide ahead of time. First, you have your ground rules, explaining to your participants how long it's going to take, what is the expectation, what you're talking about. And your ethical requirements, informed consent, anonymity, what the information is going to be used for. And then we have our key questions. What is it we're really trying to get at? So when you're designing a discussion guide, you start with some kind of opening question. So for example, we could say, let's begin. We want to find out more from you. Tell us your name and what you specialized in terms of, let's say you're in a diploma. The idea is to get people comfortable with each other and get them talking. So something easy, something quick, showing commonality among your participants. Then you have an introductory question. So here we could be asking, what's your general sense of the BBA or a program that they are in that we're trying to get feedback on? So an open-ended question to get people thinking loosely about the topic, encouraging conversation, something very low risk. So often it's kind of just your gut reaction to something. Then we transition into what we really want to know about. So we want to get more conversation towards the key areas of interest for the researchers. So maybe we talk about, why do you think a bachelor's degree is an important pursuit? Or why do you think this program is valuable? So we're moving into the heart of how well is it going? Is there value in the program that we're offering? So once you've transitioned, you have a handful of key questions, maybe 2 to 5. They each are probably going to take about 10 minutes, depending on the size of your group. And for each question, there's an opportunity for you, the moderator, to dive deeper and to explore what they're talking about. So we might ask them, what are you hoping to gain from the BBA experience? And somebody says something, oh, I want to be an accountant. And then they'll ask, okay, well, are there others who are looking for other credentials? So you can probe and you can ask, okay, well, why are you trying to do that? And trying to get a little bit deeper into the information. We might ask them about their opinions regarding the availability of classes or courses, what type of opportunities they want inside and outside the classroom, what's their opinion on registration. So there's a handful of key questions, and for each one, we're hoping that the respondents then feed off of each other. We probe deeper based on their responses, trying to flesh out more information and explore the things that they're giving us. And then at the end, we summarize. What I'm hearing from you is you like so-and-so about the BBA, but you'd like to have more of something else. Is that how you feel? So we're trying to summarize the discussion in just 2 or 3 minutes, and then say, are there any other comments you'd like to conclude with? So a last chance for them to weigh in. Did we miss anything as we are headed out the door? So a focus group, if you want to get participants, you need to kind of keep it within an hour, which can be difficult because, again, each of those key questions can take 10 to 20 minutes, but people have limited time. The downside of focus groups, it's challenging to recruit participants, but the benefit is because you can probe and because they feed off of each other, you can get a wealth of information that you otherwise wouldn't capture with an individual interview or with a survey. So we use it for exploration when we often don't quite know what the key features are that customers would like about our product, when we don't quite know the issues. We're hosting an event. We want feedback about how it went. We want feedback about strategies for our organization. We want feedback about how to recruit more people to our company. When we don't quite know what the answers are, we use a focus group to collect information. The key with a focus group is we're collecting words. And so the type of data we're collecting here is going to be text. Our note taker, our recording is going to have people's opinions and ideas, and we're going to have to look for themes. When we do a survey, again, primary data, surveys, we often already have the possible answers. So we can use the focus group to explore and get why someone might like our product, and then do a survey of a greater group to see if the opinions of the small focus group are reflected in the greater population. So we can use focus groups to figure out what customers might like about our restaurant, and then survey or provide an opportunity for people to all of our customers to respond to the survey. And this allows us to have those multiple choice responses because we know what the options should be from that brainstorming. So surveys allow for greater feedback, but they are used in more descriptive analysis to understand what is happening, or diagnostic, why is something happening. But we already need to kind of know what questions to ask as well as the possible responses. When you're designing a survey, you usually have a screen type question to figure out if first the people who are responding to your survey have the relevant information. So for example, if we are a grocery store, we would ask the question, are you the primary grocery shopper in your family? Because if they're not a grocery shopper, we really don't want to know their opinions about our grocery store. Then we have some kind of warm-up question. So immediately after the screen, easy question encourages an engagement. How often do you go grocery shopping? Something that's easy to answer. Then, just like the focus group, we transition. So we transition here. We notify the participants that we're moving into a particular subject. So we might have headings within our survey as we've themed our different questions, so that prior to some major section or a group of questions. So for the next few questions, we're going to look at your cooking habits, for example. You can have another screen or skip by each section. So maybe you're going to ask, do you prepare the meals in your household? If no, then you skip all the questions related to cooking habits. And so this is so that you're not collecting information where someone is just making something up, but you're only asking people who have relevant and informed opinions about things, the particular questions that are relevant to them. So then we get into questions. We might have multiple choice questions. So again, we need to already know what the responses could be. People get quite upset when you give them a survey and the choices they want to respond to aren't there. So for example, Red Deer Polytechnic did a survey asking people what time they thought classes should start. Should they start at 8 a.m. or 9 a.m.? Well, the challenge with 8 a.m. is childcare and getting up early. The challenge with 9 a.m. is it pushes classes to 6 p.m. So again, on the other side, childcare and jobs for the students. And so people were quite angry because there wasn't a third option of 8:30 splitting in between. So what you always want to do with your survey is you want to test it with a small group to make sure all the multiple choice potential answers are there. You can also use the focus group or exploration to make sure you've captured kind of those key options that people are looking for. In this particular example, the multiple choice question here, how often do you cook dinner in a week? So when we're doing a group of questions, we start with easier ones like the multiple choice ones, things that are less controversial. It's key, though, to remember not to ask your participants to do math. You should do the math, or we're going to code Python to do the math for us. But we would want to get it to as narrow a time as possible. And then if you want to extrapolate, then you do that, not your participant. So if we ask how often do you cook dinner in a week, that's easy enough for people to remember the last 7 days. And then, of course, you can turn that into how many times they would cook in a year when you are preparing your data set. So we start with the easy questions, typically multiple choice. Then we get to more complicated and difficult questions to ask or to answer. That's going to be in the middle of our section. So maybe we're starting to get them to talk about feelings, perceptions. So we're talking about things like rating the friendliness of the cashier, things that might be a bit more complicated. Towards the end of the section is where you have the even more complicated questions. These will be like your open-ended questions. Tell me about your best experience you had at a grocery store. What made it great? And so that takes a bit more thought, a bit more time. We want to put those at the back end of the section because if you put them too soon, then people say, oh, this survey is going to be so much work. Never mind, I don't want to do it. So you want them to be far enough into the survey with the easy questions that they've already essentially committed so that they are then willing to do the more time-intensive ones. The other thing to keep in mind is whether or not you have particularly sensitive questions. And those sensitive questions, first, you need to consider, should you even be asking? What are you going to do with this information? If you can't actually use the information, if it's not going to change how your organization is going to behave, then don't ask. If it's something that you do need to know, so let's say this is a survey related to medical health, we're talking about very personal questions about sexual activity, about sexually transmitted infections, back end of the survey, people are, once they've committed to filling out the survey, they're more likely to respond to these, so put them towards the end. But again, people need to see a clear reason as to why you're asking those more sensitive questions. So sometimes you need some kind of explanation or description as to why this is relevant. So if we start to ask things like what income, what gender, what sexual orientation, those types, often there is an explanation as to why it's relevant. So for example, I've surveyed my students about how they like to learn. And I had a question on the survey about what gender do they identify with. And I got a lot of feedback on the survey. Why are you asking this? Why is this relevant? And so in future versions of the survey, I needed to add a little description that said, well, the reason that this question is being asked is because historical research that I was trying to compare my findings to showed that there were different preferences between people who identified as male and female. So you add in that additional description so that your participants can have informed consent when they are deciding whether or not to answer that particular question. So sensitive questions go later. Make sure you have a purpose. Make sure you've explained why you're asking that if you think there's going to be reluctance to respond. The other thing you can do when you build your survey is you can take questions like, what is your income? And turn them into brackets, into groups. So your income is between 50,000 and 70,000, 70,000 and 100,000. By putting them into more broad brackets as opposed to having them write in a specific number, it makes them a little less sensitive to the response. So you have to ask yourself as you're building your survey, do I need an exact number? What would I do with that exact number? Can I get sufficient amount of information and use from a range of age, a range of income, and so on. And then at the very end of the survey, we put demographic questions. Once they've completed all of the things that have engaged them and are relevant, then asking the questions like your age, whether or not you're vegan, just to help us figure out whose opinions, like for example, are the people who cook, are they more the older people in the family? Are they the younger people? Are they more likely to identify as female? Are they the people who grocery shop? Are they more likely to be vegan? So we use the demographic questions to help us break down the responses from the other questions to see if we can identify particular cohorts or groups that feel a certain way, behave a certain way. So the demographic questions go at the very end of the survey. So we're just very briefly touching on focus groups, on surveys, and we'll just do a last discussion here on observational research. For all of these, if you want more detail about how to design a survey or do a focus group or do observational research, I encourage you to check out my book. That will link in a number of other videos, but we're looking at the Business Intelligence and Analytics Handbook. It does have appendices where we go into designing each of these. You can also take a course with Red Deer Polytechnic in marketing research where you practice all these as well. So the third type of primary data here is our observational research. And observational research can be broken down into 4 types. That is, we have people watching people. So you're observing someone as they go into a grocery store and they select the food. They can see you watching them, and you're watching people and how people behave. You can also have machines watch people. So we could have a camera recording people as they select things in the grocery store. You can also have people watching phenomenon. So instead of focusing on a person and what they do, we can choose an event to observe. And so, for example, we can look at what's happening at an intersection. So the people come and go. Rather than tracking a single person and what they do, we're tracking an event. So here we could count the number of vehicles that go through an intersection. We have a person who's counting. Alternatively, you can have machines watching phenomenon, in which case maybe you have traffic counters. Perhaps you've seen those kind of black cables that go across the road, bump with your car, and it's registering each time a vehicle drives over it. So we have a machine that is doing the watching here. When it comes to observational research, you have choices on how you design it. You can have the human or the machine do the observation. You can have structured or unstructured observational research. So with structured, the problem is defined enough ahead of time that we can provide the observer with some kind of checklist. In unstructured, we don't have enough information about the behavior, so the observer is simply going to write down what they observe. Structured has less bias. The observer themselves is less influence on what's happening because they are just checking off the person did this, the person did that. With unstructured, there is a tendency to bias because the human observer could choose to focus on one thing and minimize or maximize certain behaviors, and so that can skew what is truly happening. Unstructured allows for more information because it's not just a checklist, and so unstructured is more likely to be used in exploratory research. So here's an example of structured versus unstructured. Structured observation is a checklist like what you see on the left. So what happens when the person goes to buy a can of soup? Which can do they pick up first? And we would check that. And what you can't see that my face is hiding, it says total number of cans packed up. I should say picked up. Total number of cans picked up for examination. And so we'd say, oh, well, they looked at the labels of 3 different types of soup. So we'd write that down. How much time do they spend in the soup section of the grocery store? So very structured. In comparison, an unstructured observation would be what you see on the right, which is, if I'm observing, I would say purchaser first paused in front of the Campbell's brand. He glanced at the prices on the shelf. Sorry, I can't type today. Picked up a can, glanced at its picture and the list of ingredients, then set the can back down. He checked the label and the price of Progresso, and then we keep going. So there's a lot of detail here in terms of what the individual looked at, how long they spent on each part of the activity. And so there's a lot more information that can be gleaned in the unstructured observation. But as the observer, I'm choosing what information gets documented. And so, of course, that can skew the results. So observational research can be structured or unstructured, human versus machine. And if we are doing more machine-based observational research, and we'll look at in other videos how to code a machine to analyze images, for example, and identify what's happening. And so then that would be aiding in that observational research. The next piece here is what is called open versus disguised. The question is whether or not the individual being observed knows they're being observed. So if it is open, the subject knows they're being watched. If it is disguised, then the subject is not aware they are being watched. When you are doing disguise, there are additional ethical concerns. And so go back to your TCPS2, your research ethics board, your industry code of conduct about how to handle that if people are not going to be informed that they are being watched. Because remember, informed consent is important in terms of our data governance. The other thing to recognize, though, is that if you are open, so people know they're being watched, they might change their behavior. There is actually a study called the Hawthorne effect, and it comes from research about productivity. So what happened in the 1920s is Hawthorne works, the Hawthorne plant that you see here from this Harvard website, shows the manufacturing plant. They were making telephone equipment, And they were looking at how do we make our workers more productive. And so the study was looking at whether or not workers were more productive if you had bright lights, low lights, what happens if you change the lights. Well, what they found is that the workers were more productive, but they were more productive if you turn the lights up, if you turn the lights down. It was simply the fact that the workers were being watched that changed what they were doing. And so we need to be cognizant that if you are doing open observational research, that people may change their behavior simply because they're being observed. When you do observational research, we also need to decide, are we doing natural or contrived settings? So a natural setting takes place where that individual would have done that behavior. So if we're observing people pick out cans of soup, we are doing the observation in their actual grocery store. A contrived setting is an environment specifically designed to record people's behavior. So we might actually create a mock-up of a grocery store, but it only has one aisle, the canned soup aisle, and we get participants to go through as if they were going to buy canned soup. So we're going to recreate that grocery store. The benefit of the contrived is we don't have to wait for the event to occur naturally, and we can actually control the outside influence, right? So there's not a bunch of distractions. It's the person simply focusing on buying the canned soup. The downside, of course, is that it's contrived. It's not a real life scenario, and so that can skew the results as opposed to the natural setting. The other thing to consider is whether we are doing direct behavior or indirect behavior. So with direct behavior, we are observing someone while they are doing the activity. Indirect timing of behavior tries to capture what someone did in the past by doing things like looking through their garbage or having them set aside materials when they do an activity. So we can have people who buy and use certain products. If they use, let's say, whatever drink cart containers they buy and then drink, they put in a special bin, and then we analyze what's in that bin. We can also do it from a business perspective in terms of auditing sales receipts to look at the behavior of the customers. What did they buy? So when it comes to our primary, we have focus groups, surveys, and observational research. We'll continue this discussion in our next video as we look at secondary data analysis.